Welcome to the Finally Marketing That Works podcast. We all know marketing is a very vast array of things and services. You will see kind of the evolution of marketing. We're going to interview guests from all walks of life. Stay tuned and enjoy the Finally Marketing That Works podcast. Advertising your business on a podcast. Have you thought about it? Are you doing it? Well, let's dive into that a little bit more on today's episode of the Finally Marketing That Works podcast. There are so many podcasts out there, including this one, of course, and there are more and more getting added every single day. And hopefully you're tuning into more than just one because there's so much to learn from podcasts out there. Well, as we mentioned on a previous episode about influencers, and if you should hire influencers online to talk about your business and brand to help it grow, podcast is another one that's really good. Podcasts can have some super duper loyal followers on them, and you can tap into that as well by sponsoring a podcast. So maybe again, trying to get in front of dog people, of science people, of construction people. There's literally a podcast, I feel like, for everything out there, and they have a following of people that you probably want to have your business name and stuff mentioned to them. Well, reach out to their podcast and see if that's something you can possibly be even a guest on their podcast, or just sponsor the podcast for a specific amount of price. It could be worth it for you, and it's out there and it's just going to live out there in podcast world forever, because they should hopefully put it in the middle of the podcast to where if that podcast gets listened to, you always have your ad listened to. And I have bought things off of podcast advertising before as well, because again, it's very targeted. It's targeting me specifically who's listening to it, where this product speaks to me because of the typical followers of the podcast. So I would entertain and check it out. Some of them are super expensive. Others are cheaper depending on the amount of followers. But this goes to show how powerful targeted marketing and podcast advertising is. Because if you just go, I'm going to put a billboard out on this highway, I'm advertising to everybody. Well, I don't really want to advertise to everybody. I want to advertise to the people who are the most likely to be a client of mine. And you can do that by having very targeted advertising with the podcast for the followers that podcast has. So if I were you, check it out. See if there's a podcast maybe you listen to regularly that you love, and you're like, man, it'd be awesome if my business was on that podcast. And reach out to them and see if that's a good fit for you. Well, if you never thought about advertising your business on a podcast, hopefully you entertain the idea now and see that there is a powerful listenership, if that's a word, out there that could possibly be listening to a podcast that is wanting to buy your product or service. So check it out. See if you can advertise on a podcast and grow your business. We'll be here next week, as always, with another episode. So we'll see you next time on the Finally Marketing That Works podcast. We'll see you then.